audio from a seminar we did on the community about running one-shots. I hope you'll enjoy it and find it useful. Hello, and welcome to this seminar here on the Gauntlet Gaming Community, where we're going to be talking about running one-shots. My name is Lowell, pronouns he, him. I'm the Gauntlet Gaming Community Manager, and I wanted to talk about this because I know we've got some convention seasons coming up here in the future. My experience is based on running primarily at Origins, Gen Con local conventions, and then running one-shots online here on the Gauntlet. I have an outline that I'm working from, some notes that I'm going to be walking through. This isn't gospel. This is kind of a set of structured techniques and some general advice on running one-shots. And I'll be answering questions as we go along and talking about what I think is important in that, maybe getting some feedback as we go along throughout this. So you're going to hear me talk a lot, and I'm going to apologize for that right here in advance. But let's talk about the one shot. So what I'm talking about is a game that's usually a 3-hour block or a 4-hour block. That's structurally what we're looking at. Games on Demand at Gen Con does 2-hour block games. Those are even harder. Those are tighter games that you've really got to have a singular idea for and get those things out on the table. But for primarily what I'm talking about are 3 or 4-hour sessions. And I think one of the things that does is it starts with real brevity when you're going in for the pitch. This means, in our case, posting on the Gauntlet game calendar or posting for in event handbooks or online descriptions or at the table. And I will tell you this, your pitch may be lovely, but people are not going to read it, and they are not going to remember it when they come to the table, especially if they've registered beforehand. So be willing to be as generic with your, like, what is going to happen, give the incidental theme or something like that. You don't have to write a lot, because if you write a lot, people just aren't going to read it. What they're going to look for is the title. They're going to look for the system, and they're probably going to read the first couple of sentences of that before they trail off. So that's not to dissuade you from taking some time to write your pitch, but recognize what is actually going to be read potentially by your players. The other thing I think you need to have in a pitch, especially on the Gauntlet, but elsewhere, is mention safety tools and mention tone. You want those as things because there are people who are going to be reading and looking for those elements presented to see whether this is a GM that they want to play with, if this is the kind of game that they are comfortable with. So tight title, explain what the system is, like 1 or 2 line pitch, and then discussion of safety and tone. I think that's what works. And I say that based on having run a lot at conventions and having people sat down and go, which game is this? Because they've signed up for something ahead of time, and that they don't know in the great mass of things that they're doing what exactly we're playing. So with a one shot, you have a certain amount of prep that you're going to be doing. What I think you need to be looking at when you're going into prepping for a one shot, in terms of the kinds of materials that you're going to hand out to the players or that are on the online character keeper, is you really need to be thinking, what is the minimum that they need to know to play? And that's in 2 dimensions of play. One is they need to know some information to make intelligent choices if you have character creation, or if they're picking characters from pre-gens. They need to kind of know what those things mean, where they're going to be rolling, what their basic resolution is, so they can make those informed decisions. And then the other thing is, what's the minimum they need to know to play kind of at the start, out of the gate. If you're familiar with Forged in the Dark, Forged in the Dark is a great system, but it has a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of things to have to explain to people. And in the rules summary, and when I run one-shots with that, I tend to focus on the big things about resolution, about positioning, about those kinds of choices. Other things like the structure of downtime or equipment or those kinds of things, I save for later. Those are things that we can explain as they come up in play. So you need to be thinking about how we can slim this down. And that may mean when you go to run something that you're actually ditching like some of the high level modules, especially for a one shot. You want to give people stuff they can play from. There may be elements of play that don't come into it as much or aren't as much a focus. For example, I love the Veil. I think the Veil is one of my favorite cyberpunk PBTA games, but the Veil also has debts and debt moves and things like that that really mostly come up in longer term play. And so when I run the Veil as a one shot, I clip out some of those modules, clip out some of those things to focus in on what's the basic set of basic moves for the game and what are the cool things that the characters can do in the context of that. And that does mean in some cases clipping out some of the moves that are tied in characters or curtailing and curating playbooks. That's another thing. Don't feel like you have to have every playbook on the table. If you've run masks, you know that certain of the playbooks in masks have a lot more cognitive load, have a lot more that they require in terms of setup and in thinking and in getting materials from them to the table in play. For example, The Doomed in Masks is a very cool playbook. It's a wonderful playbook, but it's a playbook that really only functions particularly well on a longer term play because that doom track is so important. It has a clock that is on it. There are certain other things, most of the time travel based characters from Masks, I think they could be fun in a one shot, but there's also a lot of things that aren't going to get to the table that maybe the player is excited about, and that makes it tough. So think about that, curate your playbook choices, all those kinds of things. In terms of online play, you need a basic keeper for the characters or a set of things for the characters to be kept in if you're using Roll20, some kind of reference sheet. I would suggest some place for marking NPCs as a tab in the keeper or some other kind of resource, and then a roller. Those are all sort of the basic things. There's that phrase in writing about killing your darlings, about cutting things down. I think that should be an objective if you're doing a one shot, like getting to what the essential elements are of the game. Session starts. So you have before the game and then the game start itself. If you start your session 5 to 10 minutes early and people get there, take that opportunity to ask them what they know about the game, ask them, have they played this before, ask them their experience, and otherwise chat with them, ask them about themselves, about what they've been playing and so on. These are all opportunities to learn about what they're interested in, what they might dig, those kinds of things. That's part of the play there too, is even before the game starts, doing that chat and talking with people. As you know, from the Gauntlet, we have a very structured kind of approach to the start of session, and I think that applies for all of these one-shots, both in person at conventions and here online. Make sure you give introduction of yourself and your pronouns. and ask people to introduce themselves and give their pronouns. And if someone doesn't give their pronouns, follow up and say, and your pronouns. You want to establish that space early on, so that people understand that that's an important step in what we're doing. All of you probably have been in a session that has the CATS structure, the concept, aim, tone, and then subject matter or safety. It's worth doing a nice tight CATS in a one shot, and getting that to like the most basic things. What I want players to know is what I think the game is. That's the concept. The aim or approach, the A there is what we're actually going to be doing in play. Like this is what's going to happen at the table. This is the kind of things that we're going to be doing. We're doing an investigation, or we're doing a series of challenges, or we're doing a grand ball, so that they know exactly what is happening. Tone, basically to establish like what's the rating that you're imagining. Is this dark? Is this light? Giving some touchstones there. And then of course, safety is important. You want to walk through a layered set of safety tools. You don't have to justify safety tools. I've seen people at one shots like talk about, the logic behind safety tools. I think we can take safety tools, their importance as a given, and I think you need to approach it so that the players understand that safety tools are an accepted and regular part of this. That's just what we're doing now. You want to use multiple safety tools. You want to talk about what those are, how you use them, and go through those things with them. You want to stress that when someone invokes a safety tool, they don't have to explain or justify themselves. And it is not for anybody else to ask back questions or to explain why they were doing something that got X carded. They don't have to do that. We just don't. We move past that. I think people need to know that. As much as safety tools serve as a net for players during play, they're also a way of telling your players, I take this seriously. This is something that matters to me, and I'm going to be listening to what you do. I'll tell you that, and I hate to say this, but the first year that I was in the Gauntlet, I was like, safety tools, okay, whatever. It wasn't until I got to a convention and I was running at Gen Con and I saw a group of people sit down, and I went through the safety tools things, and I saw the look of absolute relief on two of the players' faces, a young woman and a young man, that they were like, oh, thank God that we're using safety tools. Thank God that I know that net is there, because they'd probably had some experiences previously in that con. So it is as much a communication of trust and trying to establish that first steps of trust in there. I think it's really, really important. One of the other things you want to do in that starting point, especially in one shot, is you want to telegraph what your structure is. You want to tell players, we've got 4 hours. We're going to take breaks at this point and this point. We're going to start with character creation, or we're going to move into this. You want to tell them what the magic trick is. This is how we're going to work today, so that they know, so that they're not like worried, okay, are we taking a break at some point, or when is the session going to end? Tell the players right at the start those things. One of the things that I do for one shots, and this is something that actually came from the handbook from Games on Demand from John Stavropoulos, who wrote the X card, is I tell players right at the start, when we get to the last 30 minutes of the session, be prepared that I am going to likely hard frame. If we're not at a place to wrap the game up, if we're not at the place to get to a high point, you may see me move that. So I just want to tell you, and I'll give you a heads up when we do that, because we do want to get to a resolution at the end. Tell players that that's going to happen so that they're prepared for that. I also tell players, especially if we're in a con environment where sessions are stacked up one against another. Games on Demand at Gen Con does this, where there is no break time between sessions. I tell players, I'm going to end 10, 15 minutes early so that you have time to get to your next session. I take your time seriously. That helps prevent people from getting antsy towards that last half hour because they're picking up their books or they're looking at stuff. It's like they're waiting for the end of class because they know they have X amount of time to get to their next session or whatnot. Be generous and give them that time, and tell them that you're going to give them that time. Okay, now I'm going to take another drink of this coffee. Oh yeah, so this is a good question here is, do you recommend demoing safety tools during the session, X-carding something yourself, particularly for groups that haven't encountered them before? Yes, if you can spot something, especially early on during character creation, one of the things to watch for is things that you feel are kind of off tone. That's an easy thing to see in character creation, especially if people are kind of joking around. Take the opportunity to, if somebody, starts going down a line that you feel is off tone, that's a good place to X card. You don't need to force it, but it is good to model that for people. The other thing is to give specific examples of X card things. I have some stuff from things that have happened in my games that I'll use. So yeah, that's a good way to get that across, because people may not have encountered these before. One of the biggest challenges that we have in running one-shots is the question of character creation. If you've played with Tyler on the Gauntlet, Tyler and I have had long conversations about this. You need to make that decision whether you're going to do pre-gens or whether you're going to do full-fledged character creation. And again, let's look at that first hour block. Even if you're doing pre-gens, that's probably going to take about 30 minutes. Because you're going to want to walk through what those are. You're going to want to do those introductions and so on. If you're clicking along and you're doing a full PBTA character creation in, say, a 3 or 4 hour block, I think you can get that done in an hour. It does mean you need to kind of hard line, okay, in the next 5 minutes, we're going to stop. If you haven't gotten to something, you can get it on the fly. If you're doing character creation for your one-shot in play while you're going along, making sure you have a tab or a sheet or something that walks through what are the choices, what are the things I'm going to have to do, get that on a separate page so people can go and flip to that, can go and look what are the steps they need to walk through. As I mentioned earlier, cutting moves down or cutting things down or holding things off until in play is a great way to kind of cut your time down. I will say, I watch within the first 10, 15 minutes, you can probably tell which players are going to have it done within the time and which ones are going to be trailing on a little bit. So keep an eye on how people are reacting, look at the character keepers, see where people are, and try and judge, give people at least a 5 minutes warning before you go to absolute, I'm going to cut to this next thing. Some games don't really work in a one-shot and are harder. I will say this, I love Legacy, Life Among the Ruins, and I love Free from the Yoke. I think those are dynamite games, but they're also games that have a lot of cognitive load to them. There are pre-gen one-shot versions of Legacy, Life Among the Ruins, and I think they're really interesting and well-written, but that would not be my first choice for a one-shot. There's still a lot to go through to make choices on that. That's a hard set of decisions there. So I do think you want to like not be overly ambitious on that. Teaching the rules. In addition to getting things set up for the character creation, when we do the sort of the startup things, is you need to stop and ask people what their familiarity is with the genre. Like, have you played this kind of game before? Like, so on. Then specifics like, have you played Apocalypse World or have you played a PBTA game? And also like, what is the word for that there? Let's stick with that for the moment here. When you're teaching the rules, when you're going through that with people, one person teaches. I know there will often be people with a lot of expertise at the table, and maybe you're the player who has a lot of expertise at the table. If the GM is explaining the rules, let the GM go through the mechanics of that. If there's something vital or crucial that they've missed, wait a few beats before you jump in to explain that. Because if someone is trying to absorb the rules and there are multiple people dropping that information on them, that just makes it more confusing. Try to focus in on one person managing and taking care of that part of the game. In terms of teaching rules, what do people need to know? They need to know enough to make their choices about character creation, and they need to know enough to make choices about basic resolution. I've said this before, I'll say it again, that's what you need to forego. Sometimes you'll have players who do know more and will ask about certain things. Feel free to say, we're holding off on that mechanic until later. Another drink of my coffee. I talked about from the question that Chet put about modeling elements of safety and so on, getting those things on the table. Let me talk about structure. I said this before, but your game is usually broken up into 3 or 4 hour blocks. I tend to look at those very structurally. So if we've got a 3 hour game, the first section is character creation and introductions. We're probably looking at then, if we have enough time, that we might do a little bit of incidental play, but usually that's going to run up to the first break, and I try and get that in that first hour. That's our first block of play. The second block, that sort of second hour of a 3 hour thing, is our major play. We want to get rolling up to the high point there in that second hour. Take another break. In that third hour, we want to be moving as quickly to sort of the finale, to the big showdown there, with enough time that we can do epilogues and maybe debrief. I will say, of those two, epilogues are much more important than the debrief. If you're running up close to time, if you've got 15 minutes left or whatever, you want to give players the chance to close out the story with their characters. You want to give them the right to do that. I think that's really important. It provides a capper. If you end strong, and if you end strong with player collaboration, that is what players are going to work from, what they're going to remember. So please give people time for those epilogues. If you want to do stars and wishes, you can do that. But again, I think of those two, the epilogues are more important. In 4 hours, if I'm doing a 4 hour session and I'm taking 2 breaks, it's the same sort of thing. It's the same sort of structure of 3 segments there. That last hour is really important. Do not be afraid to push or hard frame players to get them connected with one another if they're separated or directed towards things. Feel free to be a little bit obvious. Tell people what you're doing, that, hey, this is how we're going to work this right now so we can get to the end. Players will appreciate that, and they'll be on board because they do want to see things come together. Within that, one of the things I do, and I think is really important here, once we kind of get the structure and you get play running, establish how you're going to be ordering initiative. And this is not combat initiative I'm talking about. I'm talking about the cycle of how players are going to go. What I typically do is I establish an order, often based on the order of characters in the character keeper, of going, I'm going to start with X person, and then next, and then come around. Model that early so people know that you pay attention to that, that you're not, it's not just a free for all, but that you are doing that. But the other thing you want to model is that if somebody does have something like, oh, I want to go to this, I want to do this, that they can, that we can switch the order up, that this is not a hard and fast rule, but that people have some structure. That I call that out and tell people that's what I'm doing when I go and do that at cons or one shots, so they know that that's important. Because sometimes players will have come in from other one shots where they've had to grab for attention or they've had to push for those things. It's worth telling them that this is something that you care about. I'm going to talk about the starting question here in just a second that Pavel just asked, which kind of flows into the next point. But I want to tell you something very physical and very mechanical that I do that is a trick. So I have two screens here when I'm playing online. I've got this one, and this has my camera mounted on it. And this is the one where I'm seeing all your faces. Over here, I've got my sheets and so on the second screen. I always keep an eye on the time. I always check and know what time it is. And I actually put the clock on my desktop up at the top right-hand corner of my screen. And I do that because when you look down, it's a gesture to the players that I'm looking down, I'm checking something else, I'm looking at my phone, or I'm checking the thing. It's a little more subtle when you have it up here in the upper corner. And it is easily in your line of sight as you're looking across. You should always know what time it is in the session. That's a really important thing for one shots, is to know how much time has passed, how much time a scene is taken, how much time you have before you get to the next break. Be aware of that and set that up. And again, this is all not gospel, but this is what has helped me enormously going on. Will asked a question of, how do I handle initiative and PBTA move that let you appear in another character scene? If someone does that, then yes, they're changing their order. They're shifting the order of things, and we may recalculate. If somebody has one of those moves that they could appear to help somebody out, we can do that. Always make sure, if they're doing that in the middle of someone else's action, that you give the player who is acting the opportunity to finish out what they were saying, to finish out what they were doing, and check in with them before this other player comes in, if they're coming in to interact in the scene or to help them. Any of those moves that come in to assist another person or to interrupt and stuff, those are places you absolutely want to be checking in on with both players and making sure they were cool with it. And the player who's getting interrupted, make sure that you tell them, you're being interrupted, but I'm going to give you the chance to finish out what you're doing. They need to know that. They need to be reassured that that is happening for them. My typical structure for one-shots are either I start with the group all together with a big incident. We're in the middle of a fight. I ask the first player, why is this room on fire? Why is this building coming down? Why is this ship sinking? Starting out all together in that situation, and then going around and having each player add details onto that. I'll have my own sense of what the incident is, and I will build on what they've got. But that's one structure: is everybody together, big incident, kick it off right away. It might be a fight, it might be a physical obstacle they have to overcome, but that's one approach. The other thing that I do is I set up pairings. This is typical in Hearts of Wulin, where we've already built those entanglements and those connections. I will figure out pairings that are people, the characters know each other, but like they're not entirely going to answer each other's questions about their lives through that. I set up the two pairings, and then I move things in parallel and bring them together. Those are my two structures. So the two templates are for me, both for starting and for full play, work like this. In medias res, incident, explosion, blow up, fight, whatever. Then after that, the next part is regrouping and giving the players a chance to interact with each other and possibly interact with NPCs. Then there's the investigation. And this just means getting from point A to point B, finding things out, maybe interacting with NPCs. Then an obstacle. This can be a physical challenge, it can be a mental challenge, it can be something that they have to overcome to get to the finale, which is the big showdown with whatever force. And I'm talking very conventional play here. These are our easy template structures. If you're running short on time, that obstacle before the final confrontation is the thing that can get cut. It can get jettisoned. You'll look at your time and you can cut that. But that's an easy template. If you're like, oh, I want to run this game, that's an easy way to set things up. The other way, and this is often my typical Hearts of Wulin approach, is pair up the characters. They are both of them. Both pairs are heading somewhere. They are traveling. They are going someplace either in town or from one place to another. While they're on the road, there is an incident, an attack, a murder, someone being pursued, something like that. And one pair gets tied up in that, and then the other pair comes in to help them out, especially if they're overwhelmed. This can be, rescuing them out in the woods, or it can be they're about to be attacked in a tea house. These are all character things. Once that's done, they get a chance to interact. We find out that the incident suggests that there's some connection to the problem at the destination. So they realize there's a situation like the person who's been murdered was supposed to be at the party that they're going to, or that the person who's been kidnapped is somebody, from this place that they're headed to. There's travel to destination, arrival, investigation, and then a final confrontation. Those are two very easy structures to go with. Now, some games like Monster of the Week have different structures built into them, but these are templates you can drop into a lot of different things. Okay, another slug of coffee. Did I answer that? Yes, I answered those questions there. Okay. Yeah, I really think painting the scene right at the start, letting people make those choices is good. Now, there is a caution I want to give with the why is this room on fire? If you're at a table of players and one of the players is more familiar with PBTA or with improvisational games, or maybe you've played with them before, cheat and make them the player you ask first. Because they're familiar with it, they will model what like answering an improvisational question looks like. Be prepared if you've got a table of people that maybe aren't as familiar with that to slow down and explain what you're doing. Like, why is this room on fire? And then say, so I'm going to let you explain to me where you think we are and what has happened. Because some players may have not played in that kind of game before. Be willing to stop and give them the explanation that they need. And if they get stuck, take whatever they give and praise that and support that and build on that and move to the next person. So that's just a little bit of a caveat there. Pacing. This is so important. This is so important. It's the most important thing I can tell you of anything about GMing. Unless you're playing with your friends that you've played with for years, and even then, maybe don't. You should ask any of your questions. What do we do next? What do you think of this? What is the next step? Ask those to a player, not to the table. You can poll the table for reactions to things. That's a common technique in PBTA. But even when you do that, start with a person. So let me poll the table about what you think about this incident. Sherry, what do you think? Start with a person and work your way around. Because especially in a one-shot with people that haven't played together, they don't have the social dynamic to know when they should talk or not talk. They don't want to talk over one another. And you want to avoid that dead air. You want to avoid them sitting there worrying about that things. Now, sometimes when you go to ask somebody, be prepared that if they're uncertain, say, would you like me to go on? Would you want me to come back to you? That people who you ask, we're not like putting them on the spot. We're giving them an opportunity to answer those questions. If they're not comfortable with that or they don't have an opinion, make sure that you support them saying, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I don't want to answer. But you want to ask those questions to people specifically. Another thing that is a mental calculation that I think you need to be doing as a GM is in each of those blocks of time that you have in a 4-hour session or however, you want to make sure that each person definitively gets a spotlight moment where they get to make a choice, where they get to do a thing, they get to take a really cool action. You want to mentally make sure in your mind, I know that each person has done that at least once. Now, obviously, you want to spread the spotlight and share it around, but you want to make sure if we've done character creation quickly and we move into maybe doing 30 minutes of play before we get to that first break, I'm going to move things fast and make sure that I definitely get everyone to get that spotlight moment. Even if I have to delay the break a little bit, I want everybody to have their say. And it's one of the things that I keep in mind when I'm running. It's a little rote, it's a little mechanical, but I am trying to give everybody a high point there in that. I've talked about telegraphing order. I'm talking about saying that. One of the things I will do, especially if you have some players that maybe go a little bit long, you'll know this early on. Some players are a little more elaborate in what they're doing. One of the things I'll do is I'll say, okay, let me have you go, Paul, and next we're going to be coming to you, Will. I like telegraph, like, hey, we're going to have you go, and then we're going to move to this next person. Especially if we're changing up order or if things have happened, things like that. Don't be afraid to say, this is our turn sequence. This is how we're doing things. This is how we're going along. It helps people know where they are in the queue. It also helps, like if someone maybe got a shorter bit before and now maybe some long scenes have come up, I will say, hey, we haven't heard from you in a while. I'm going to come to you next to let you get a chance to say something. I'm very meta about that. And I think it helps people be awake and aware and know that you're paying attention to those things. One of the questions I've gotten when I've talked other places is about how you handle safety. We have a bunch of safety tools, but sometimes the real question is, okay, how do we handle that in the execution? We've mentioned modeling the use of the X card. We've mentioned reinforcing the fact that people don't have to justify what they're X carding, and that people don't have to defend themselves if something they do gets X carded. We just move on from there. The most likely thing, in my experience, is a joking reference to something, or something talked about dismissively, or mocked, or feel like off tone, things like that, especially during that character creation process when people are still kind of getting used to the table. That's the point at which to maybe go, hey, I think I want to X card that. Because you don't want to let like a poisonous comment go by early on in that character creation process. You also want to X card if someone is talking over somebody else. One of the challenges can be, especially in online, is some people will get excited and will interrupt, or will say, oh, I have an idea. You can X card that, or you can say, okay, I'm going to have you hold that for a second. I want to have X person finish what they were saying before you get your input in here. You need to kind of model that interrupting people is not a great thing, and that's important. The other thing you might hear is particular language that you find problematic. That's another place where you might X card somebody. Those are my most typical incidents of things, are people with particular language, joking or being dismissive about something like safety tools, or interrupting people. And that's where I jump in as the GM. Stop and explain that, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to X card that. We're going to move on, refer back to safety tools at that point. If it escalates, and I've never had that at my table, but I have seen this at conventions, stop. If you're online, you can boot people in most of the call setups that you have. Take a break if you need to. If you need to boot somebody, you can do that. If you otherwise are at a physical con, know who it is you're going to go to, know where the desk is, all of that kind of thing. Be prepared to do that. Take advantage of that, because if you're feeling uncomfortable, your players are probably feeling more uncomfortable. And if you don't, it's just going to poison things. It's especially, and I would say this is actually a really point that Will made. The other thing, and I should have said this earlier, is some people may not be familiar with online play, and so they may not know that it is important that people mute themselves when they're not on. Say that early. I mean, make that explicit at the start that you want to do that. I think it does help people. Encourage people to talk in the chat if they have things that they want to go over in that space. We talk about a few last things, and let me follow up. Eduardo has a question here. What are the techniques for handling scenarios coming off punitive or shutting down an excited player? What I tend to do with the first couple of times is I'll say, okay, that's great. Let me have X person finish, and then let me come back to you. I tell the person, I've heard what you've said. I've heard that you have something you want to add, that you want to bring into the situation, but I need you to let this person finish. And then I'm going to come back to you. I'm not shutting you down completely. I'm just asking you to hold for a moment. And then I make sure that I definitely do go back to that person. I think being really explicit about, yes, I've heard you. And we are going to give you a chance to talk. If people do that repeatedly, then I'm adding in, okay, I need you to hold on here. I want to make sure that X person has a chance to finish their thought, and then we'll bring you in on that. The other thing that some of my players do now, especially players who are a little more excitable, they'll raise their hand. And if you do see somebody raising their hand physically in the thing, then what I typically do is I'll say, okay, I see you, Brandon. I'm going to have you hang on for 1 second. Let me have finished out. And then it seems like you have a suggestion. It's meeting management. There are two things that are real world things that are go into GMing. One is interviewing, if you know how to interview people and ask questions, and the other is meeting management. Those are the two things we're doing most often as GMs. Let me go through like a handful of brief bits of information, and then I want to let people ask questions or add insights and things like that. Here are my like other generalized tips. So do not come into the session and say, I'm just winging this game, or I haven't prepared anything, or I just read the rules. Don't do that. Even if you are, I swear to God, even if you are, what that's saying to the players is, I don't value your time. I don't value that you've decided to come in and play this. Don't start out that way. Just go in, get to play. I mean, and if you are off on rules, stop and take the time to go, okay, I need to check on that. But generally, you want to start out as positive about things. Another thing that's kind of related to that, if you've run the scenario several times, you'll have seen very different solutions to the problems or very different things happening. Don't talk about what the other players and other versions of the scenario have done. When I am running the scenario for this A group, they are my group. They're the only ones who've ever played this. They are the best. They are the most awesome folks here at the table. The only thing you should do with that is at the end, if you want, you can compare it, what they've done, to other players' solutions and talk about how their solution was so much better, that they praise them. That's the only context that you want to do that in. There's a piece of standard RPG advice for GMs, and it really goes double for one-shots. Be obvious. Play characters broadly, or play them broadly against type. Make the guy with the evil voice the good guy. But it's a flip, but it's still obvious. It's still big. It's a big tell. Your mysteries shouldn't be too complicated. You want to give players a chance to solve that. This relates to a little bit later point, but I'll say this. What you perceive as a challenge being too easy, the players are not. You will underestimate what a challenge is. You'll go, oh, that was so easy for them. They just got through it. No, the players have struggled. They've been wandering in the void, figuring these things out. So never feel like you're making it like too easy on the players. Sometimes players will make collaborative statements or make choices based on incomplete information. They don't know all the rules, or they don't know the setting or whatever. Where possible, say yes to that. Or say yes, but. Yes, I think that works in this context, but we'll consider that later. Saying no to those things because they've had incomplete information, or maybe they haven't heard something, it's a way to make a player feel bad. You don't want to do that. especially if you're working from like a complex setting. Don't penalize people for not like having grasped what the setting is early on. Recognize that some players are going to come in from a very different paradigm of play. And you want to help them. Some players are going to be gun shy, uncertain about the structure. Stop, slow down, walk them through. You want to help them out. I talked about listening to what people have to say at the start. Where possible, if you can reincorporate themes or characters or ideas that players have mentioned at the start, even before play, do that. I'll give you a concrete example. I ran masks at Gen Con a few years ago, and during that 10-minute sort of sit down BS session, I was listening to them all talking about their experience with masks, and one of the players said, there is this villain that's in the villain deck that I really love. I love this villain. And I wrote that down, and when we got to the end, I pulled back the curtain, and it was that villain. I did that, and the look on the player's face when they realized the villain they loved was in there was great. Even if it maybe doesn't quite fit with what you were thinking, be willing to switch that up to again give players a treat, to show them that you've been listening to them. That always be listening. Always be listening to what players have to say as much as possible. I always have a notebook right by me here. I'm left-handed, and I'm a right-handed mouser, so I'm able to make notes on that. You may have to type up notes. If you're Dan Brown, you'll have made extraordinary notes by that point. So just keep that in mind. When someone asks a question, there are two things you want to do. One, you want to answer that question as tightly as possible. Don't tell them a bunch of shit that they don't need to know. If they're asking about, what does this skill do? Don't tell them about how the skill fits into the broader context of skills in the game. If they're asking about a particular character or a particular incident in the setting, tell them what's important about that. Don't go off on a 5-minute tangent about how that fits into the broader context of the setting. I've seen that at one-shots. It is frustrating for the players because they just want an answer to the thing. And while you may love all the stuff that you've come up with, you really want to give them the answer to their question, as tightly as possible. So that's the important part about answering questions. I had another thing that I was going to say about answering questions, but I swear to God, it is right out of my head. So those are my caveats, my basics, and things like that. There are some questions in the chat I'm going to answer. And then if other people have questions, I'll be glad to answer those. Any tips on how to handle major disagreements and or spontaneous PvP? If it seems like two players are having a major disagreement, I stop things and I break down what's going on. I say, okay, it sounds like you want X and you want Y. Then I'll check in possibly with the rest of the table, but you need to stop things before they get heated, and you need to break down what the structure is and then walk through it with them. If the game has like PvP mechanics, like Hearts of Wulin has that, I'll say, okay, this feels like there's a serious challenge here. Do you want to go to those mechanics to resolve this? I think that the most important thing is when you see people getting irritated or getting PvP, step in, stop, and narrate what's happened at the table, because it brings it out explicitly what's going on. And now we have to deal with these matters. We resolve them, and then we can move on. That's been my thing. What's my strategy for complainers, people who poo-poo the game while it's happening? One of the things that I do is I give them the coolest shit possible. Like I give them the thing. I give them the shiny cookie after I've heard them poo-poo. And if they don't want that cookie, then at that point I know that they're bad faith actors. And at that point, you can talk to them at the break. You can ask them if they want to continue on. You can mention, you can say, we have an open door policy. We have an open table policy, and if you want to step away, and if somebody is accelerating that in a really unpleasant way, that may be a time to go and get whatever authorities or to remove them and talk with them later. You don't want them impacting other people's enjoyment of the game. Let's see. Other questions. There are other questions people want to ask about one shots or about other gaming impossible in general, rather. And if you want to unmute and say you're also welcome to anything else, or even suggestions that you have.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at a game that you want to play as a one shot, to you, when you're starting to come up with ideas of rules to maybe not present at first, or maybe even rules to completely not teach, what are some things that trigger for you that are not needed for a one shot? Is that
yeah. So if I've played it before, then I'll run back through my mind and think, okay, what are the things we didn't get to? What are the things we didn't do in play? What are the modules of play that, as I mentioned, the veil earlier, that we almost never got to that book, so we'll cut that. But the other thing I'll do, if it's a new game, I try to look at like how much are these rule things baked throughout? Like, is this really important to the play? And I'll give you an example of this. The Dune 2D20 game is pretty cool. I like it quite a bit. But if I were to go and run that as a one shot, there's a whole set of things about zones and movement that add in a bunch of weird rules and things that feel kind of bolted on. And while they're in a lot of places, I don't think they're necessary. Like we can get those elements out. And I can mention that if we were playing, in a longer game, I would have these rules in here. I mean, you can point to them or things like that. Anything that like you think would slow down or go. I'll tell you another game where I allied rules. I love the Sprawl. I think the Sprawl is a wonderful mission-based game. I think it's really cool, but I cannot get my head around the net running rules in there. So I take those out. I make the technician, the mechanic, kind of the hacker, and we make the hacking more of a single move thing rather than going to an entire subsystem. That's the thing you should be looking for, is subsystems that seem to like add a whole nother secondary game that you feel kind of draw away from the main play. That's generally where I cut. Any suggestion on how to push forward when there's a streak of missed results? Yes. Hard moves are your friends. There are two things that I want you to recognize about hard moves that especially on one shots. Number one, when someone does a miss and there is a hard move, and people are going to disagree with me on what I'm about to say. That hard move doesn't have to happen in that moment, in that scene. One of my favorite hard moves that I've done is somebody failed on a roll and you can have the player get part of what they want. But then I cut away to one of their beloved NPCs in another scene betraying them to their rival. And we were playing Passiones. So it was perfectly in genre that we cut away. This is off screen. The characters don't know this, but this is what is happening. The hard move is a chance for you to do any kind of reaction as a GM. It doesn't have to be in that scene like, okay, well, you fumble, fall down, and hurt yourself. It can be something that goes at. And the thing is, that's cool stuff. It adds to the fiction, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a failure. It feels like, well, I failed, but more cool stuff has happened. The other thing that I do, and again, people sometimes disagree with me on this, is I will say, I'm going to take that hard move, and I don't have it here, but I actually have a physical shelf. I take that hard move and I put it on a shelf, and I say, I'm going to come back to that. That is sitting out there. I want you to know that I'm going to do that. And I make sure that I get that to go off a little bit later, usually during a more high point for the players. I don't want to double down on making it negative. I make sure that I explicitly say, and this is that hard move from earlier that's coming into play. Hard moves don't always mean failure. Especially if it's like they're asking, they want to get information, or they're trying to do a basic thing. Yes, you can leap across the chasm, but here's this other thing that's going to occur. One of the things to remember is that hard moves are often about foreshadowing bad stuff. It doesn't have to be that bad stuff is happening now. It's that we are going to reveal a future threat, or we're going to reveal a problem that is happening there. The other thing I will do, especially if we're getting a streak of misses, is I will slow down the number of rolls. If we've got a big string of misses, I'll try and hand wave more things about, okay, I don't think we need to roll. We can move on to that for a little bit to let people catch their breath. Because there's nothing like being in a scene where miss within the span of 15 minutes. That is infuriating. So give players a chance to catch their breath. As a GM, you can shape the play that way. Other games that really struggle is one-shots. I think Gumshoe is hard as a one-shot because there's a lot of mechanics that people may not be familiar with, and you've got to explain that. It's also a game that has a resource economy that is predicated on multiple sessions. So if you're going to run like Gumshoe in a one-shot, you probably need to cut those resource pools down. The One Ring is probably a challenging one just because, and I'd say this is the same thing for Forbidden Lands, because it's got a big, really cool sub-module about journeying and traveling and things like that that can eat up a lot of time. I'll tell you, we're playing Red Markets right now, which is a zombie game. There are a bunch of modules in that I would have to cut to make that really work. There's a bunch of things about negotiation and things like that. I think those are things, anything where one of the centerpieces of the game is like a big kind of weird subsystem, they're going to be harder to do as a one shot. I'll tell you a game that I really struggle with, and that is Brindlewood Bay. I love Brindlewood Bay. Like, I think it's one of my favorite games. But I think it's a real challenge for one shots because Brindlewood Bay really sings when the characters get to interact with one another, and they get to interact with the NPCs and take the time for that to breathe. Like, I think you can do Brindlewood Bay as a one shot, and I have run it, but I think it kind of does a disservice to how good that game is, especially because you've got to have that like last hour to do this, the theorize move. So that would be another game I think is struggle. Games that surprise me as being good for one shots. I will say, I think Tales from the Loop. I was not certain how well it would work because it is a very character focused game, how well that would work as a one shot, but because the mechanics are so light, it actually worked very well because there was a lot more room for people to play in the moments with their characters and go through that. So I would say that's another one that struck me as being particularly good for that. I played a game of Urban Shadows with Marissa Kelly at Origins a few years ago. I want to say that I think Marissa Kelly may be the best GM I've ever played with in my life. And it's not doing a disservice to anybody else I've ever played with, but they were so good. And I would have told you before that I didn't think Urban Shadows would work as a one shot, but it did. It really did. They were fast. They had you do the essential stuff. They had some plot templates that they dropped things into. And I think that's one thing I've learned is if for Hearts of Wulin, I have a dozen like in my head plot templates that could happen. I don't go into a session with one of those in mind usually. I've started to go in and go, okay, these characters and this thing looks like it'll fit into this kind of plot, and then we work from there. GM-less, GM-full games. I really wish Donna were here because Donna has run a ton of one-shots on the Gauntlet and has done an amazing job with GM-less games. I find GM-less one-shots challenging for me because often, unless the GM-less game has a really good, tight structure about when you need to go or when you need to do things, it can be unclear, like, should I be talking? Should I not be talking? I'm supposed to call a scene. That's hard. Like we played Dream Apart as a one shot, and it wasn't until like the last hour that I think people started to get a sense of when we should be taking control and narrating and when we should not, and so on. I think that those are hard. And I think that Jamie does a great job of like presenting GM-less games and handling them in that context. Are there specific things I look for, appreciate from players in a one shot? When players take the lead, but bring other people along. Sometimes there's that bit in the first hour where it's not clear, like, okay, what are we going to do? Like, who's in charge? It's good when a player says, okay, I think maybe we should do this, but then checks in with people and brings them along. We don't want the collaborative board game problem of the quarterback running things, but it is good when people have a good definite sense. People should be brave and do what they want and ask, can I do this? How can I do this? I think that's important. Dan, do you want to talk about the park? Are you feeling up to that? Or the pack, rather? On voice rest. Okay. Dan ran a Belonging Outside Belonging game, The Pack, which I love, which is about dogs in sort of a post-apocalypse. And he said that worked well. And I think actually that was an interesting one because having played that with him, we very quickly got into our roles and very quickly got to that. Specific things to look for, appreciate from players. I said that, blah, blah, blah. Oh, here's another thing I've done recently that I suggest is if you've got a game where there's like the potential for players to make connections to NPCs, like entanglements from Hearts of Wulin or other games, have a page like the NPC tab that we have in our Keeper with pictures and some names. Don't have to do like a massive amount of them, but say, hey, if you want to connect your player to an NPC, there are some example NPCs with names and pictures on X tab. It makes things much easier. It means that you give permission to players to make up new people if they want, but if they just want to kind of fall back and draw from existing resources, it's an easy resource to do as a GM that helps people out. Other questions? About anything in general? We all good?
I do have one question.
Yes, please.
All right. So I was running a one-shot playtest yesterday, and I had this issue which was new to me. One of the players was taking very, very long to like figure out what his actions would be in a way that significantly slowed down play. So what I did was, well, let's give you some time to think and move on to the other people meanwhile. But even so, he still had this, to use a board game term, like analysis paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there weren't that many options because it's an Aegon hack, so it's usually pretty clear what you're doing. You just have to narrate. So have you had that situation, and how have you dealt with it? If you have, or how would you deal with it?
Yeah, I have had that. Often, there are two forms of that. One of that is the freeze when you're in the spotlight, where I'll go to a player and they don't know, but when I move away from them, then they realize what they do know. If you see that, that's one where you can know to come back to them quickly. The analysis paralysis that you're talking about is a harder one, and I think what you did of like, hey, okay, let me move on. I'm going to come back to you. Is a reasonable thing to do. But one of the things I think then, if you come back to them and they still don't know, maybe narrow their range of choices down. Say, okay, it seems like you're in this situation. Do you want to do X or Y? I think that narrows their choices down. It acknowledges that they have a situation. I don't think it takes away that much autonomy. And you can then move on to the next round and, put them at the in the order again, wherever you want. And say, in the way whenever I ask questions that are like X or Y, I say, do you want to do X or Y or something else? Like give them permission that if they wanted to slide out of that, but by narrowing it down to X or Y, you focus them a little bit more, cutting away some of the choices. That would be my approach. I don't know if it would work, but that would be the way I would approach that.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable, and that's helpful. So thank you. I'll keep it in mind for the next.
Oh yeah, no, that's hard. That's hard.
Yeah.
And Aegon's really such a strange game. I love it, but it's such a strange game with a very different approach to things. So yeah, I can see where people would get a little like uncertain about it.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming on here to listen to me babble. If anybody has questions in between, you can feel free to email those to me. We're going to try and hopefully do some more scenes and sessions like this. I'd like to, and I'm going to say this, I'd like to get Rich Rogers on to just talk about how he hacks games for Star Wars, because I think there's a lot of technique that he's doing with that would be really useful for people to know. So we're going to try and do that. Maybe we'll do something on running longer campaigns online and so on. So I am going to stop the recording.